Hey everyone, I hope you've had a good week. I hope you've taken advantage of some of the beautiful weather that we've had. I hope you've gotten out and found stuff to do. This Friday, I don't want to take a few minutes and I just want to talk to you guys through just a passage of scripture that probably a lot of you are familiar with. And for those of you that aren't, I'm sure you've at least probably heard something along the lines of what we're going to talk about today. But we're going to be in Matthew chapter 14. And I'm just going to read verses 22 through 33, and then I want to talk to you guys just for a few minutes. So in Matthew chapter 22, Matthew chapter 14, verse 22, this is what it says. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. They had been on the Sea of Galilee, right on the shore. Jesus had been teaching, and now he's sending them to the other side, and he's sending them ahead of him in a separate boat. And after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And later that night, as he was there alone, the boat was already a considerable distance from land, and it was buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So Jesus has sent the disciples over across the lake ahead of him, and he has stayed back to spend some time to pray and just to talk to God the Father. And the disciples are now a considerable distance from land, and all of a sudden they find themselves in this storm. They find themselves in a spot where the waves are beating against the boat, the wind's beating against the boat, and these weren't like big cruise ships. These were little tiny fishing boats, and this thing was just getting wrecked by the water, and the disciples, for good reason, were very scared. But in verse 25 it says, "Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake." Walking on the water. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. So imagine the disciples in this boat. They've basically gone all night through this storm. They haven't made it across the lake because the storm is so strong. And towards dawn, all of a sudden, they see in the distance what looks like a ghost walking on the water towards them. And they were absolutely terrified. But it says, but Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." So Jesus is saying, guys, I'm not a ghost. This is me. Relax, take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. Don't be afraid. And Peter, one of the disciples, speaks up and he says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." Then Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. So imagine Peter's in this boat. He and the other disciples are seeing Jesus walking on the water. And to be sure that it's not a ghost and that it is really Jesus, Peter simply says, "All right, Jesus, if that's really you, I want you to tell me to come walk on the water, and I want to walk on the water with you." And Jesus says, "Okay, Peter, come on out." And Peter, probably in one of the bravest moves I've ever seen, gets out of the boat and starts walking on the water towards Jesus. And it's just this amazing thing. But in verse 30, this is what it says. It says, "But when he saw the wind, when he saw the storm around him, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, 'Lord, save me.' And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. 'Oh, you of little faith,' Jesus said, 'why did you doubt?' Then they climbed into the boat and the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped Jesus, saying, 'Truly you are the Son of God.'" So here's Peter in this moment. He's walking on the water with Jesus, which is such an amazing and mind-blowing thing to try to figure out. But he's standing there walking on the water, but then his focus comes off of Jesus, and he begins to look at the storm around him, and he becomes afraid and begins to sink. And Jesus simply says, "Why did you doubt?" But then he saves him. Guys, I don't know where you're at this week. I don't know how your hearts are doing through all of this. Certainly, we hope there's a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, maybe with some restrictions being lifted soon and we can be back together for some form of youth group. But in the meanwhile, I want to make sure you guys understand that it's so important to keep your focus on Jesus, even when there's storms around us. You know, a lot of people like to beat on Peter and say, "Oh man, he didn't trust Jesus enough and he started sinking." But what a lot of people don't stop and give him recognition for is the fact that Peter had enough faith in the first place to step out on the water. And guys, this week, I hope that you've had enough faith to step out into a relationship with Jesus. But as you're going through life and as we're going through day-to-day experiences in this new normal, I trust that you're keeping your focus on God. Because what happened to Peter was when his focus was more on the things around him that caused him fear, that's when he lost sight of what Jesus was doing, and that's when he began to sink. So my prayer for you guys this week is that you'll stay focused on Christ, and that you'll stay focused on your relationship with him. You'll look for ways to draw close to him, as we've been encouraging you to do over the last number of weeks. But guys, it's so important. If you've stepped out in faith and you're walking with Christ and you're walking with God, it is so important to maintain focus. Because sometimes we can get caught up in all the things that are surrounding us and all the things that cause us fear and anxiety and despair. And when those things get in the way, it seems impossible sometimes to see what God is really doing and to be encouraged by his word and be encouraged by the people around us who are also following God. Because we can get so bogged down by looking at the storm and not focusing on Jesus, who's called us to walk on the water with him. So that's my prayer for you guys this week. It was a short thought. I hope you're doing well. Looking forward to seeing you tonight. Tonight is movie night. Don't miss out. But in the meanwhile, guys, stay safe. Have fun. Get outside. It's beautiful. Goodness gracious. We'll see you guys as soon as we can.